All right, everyone, we'll get started with tonight's meeting. All right, present tonight for staff, we have Dylan Pipinich, Planning Director, and Lila Osborne, Senior Planner. We'll take a roll call of members. Tonight's meeting is May 11th, 5:30. Roll call of members: Mike McLeod, Julie Jackshaw, Denise Anderson, Bart Riley, Josh O'Neill, Jeremy Sally, Sean Ori, Bill Daly. Okay. All right. Does anyone wish to provide public comment on anything not on the agenda tonight? Okay. All right. The first and only item on tonight's agenda is Sub-Pre 23-3, the Blacktail Creek Major Subdivision. The preliminary plat of Blacktail Creek Major Subdivision proposes creating 11 new lots for residential development. Each proposed lot is between 1 to 2 acres and shall be served by individual well and septic systems. All lots will be assessed by existing road. Was this meeting public advertised?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it was.
Thank you. All right, at this time we'll hear the staff report.
Thank you. The Blacktail Creek subdivision proposes creating 11 lots, each of which are between 1 and 2 acres. The application also contains a variance request to the subdivision regulations, Section 14, dedication of parks and open space, to construct a paved pedestrian trail instead of providing dedicated parkland or cash in lieu, and I'll go into more detail in that later in the presentation. Here's some aerial imagery for context. And here's the plat with the 11 total lots, but I know a lot is going on. This is the comprehensive plan place types, and they're all different versions of green, but the subdivision is in the suburban residential place type, and these are non-regulatory. These are the projected land use types that the comprehensive plan has designed. Over here we have the working lands place type, and then rural residential is farther to the south. I'll also note that the property in proposal is not zoned. And here are some pictures looking southeast from Continental, looking south from Meadowview Drive, which borders this lot to the north. This is looking southwest from Meadowview Drive and the start of the interior road that currently does not have a name. Looking northeast from Passmore Canyon Road to and the start of the interior road. And looking west from Passmore Canyon Road. All this vacant land here is what's in question. So the subdivision was advertised in the Montana Standard by certified mail to each adjacent property owner and by a board at the site. The legal ad originally, the Montana Standard posted it in Billings instead of in Butte by accident, and that's why we're having the special meeting tonight, because it messed up the required 15 days before a meeting date. The Montana Code Annotated lists primary criteria for which to review subdivisions, and the most relevant are included in this presentation, but they're all included in the staff report. The Montana Department of Environmental Quality reviews the well, the septic, and the stormwater plans for all subdivisions. All major subdivisions, I should say. The first criteria is effects on local services. So the subdivision regulations require that subdivisions' new lots connect to public road, water, and sanitary sewer infrastructure whenever feasible. But since there are no nearby public water or sewer utilities here, individual well and septics are proposed. The subdivision will be accessed by existing road networks, and that existing interior road will be improved to county road standards rural/suburban local 2A, and it'll be named with the Butte-Silver Bow addressing road name conventions. It'll remain a private road with a public access and utility easement, and it's expected to be maintained by an HOA that would be created by this subdivision. And I'll note that all new driveways that would result from the subdivision would be required to connect to that interior road, not to Continental or the other two roads, north and south. Effects on the natural environment. Nitrate levels are known to be elevated in this area, and I'll touch more on that in a few slides. Groundwater availability has been studied by the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology and the applicant, and a noxious weed management plan has been provided, and it'll need to be accepted by the weed board before a final plat can be approved. There was also FEMA floodplain zone A on this property, and what a zone A floodplain means is that there's no elevation data describing the actual boundaries of the floodplain. So this boundary that we see on the left, which was on the FEMA map, is an approximate boundary. And so to reconcile that, the applicant conducted a letter of map amendment, which does a detailed study on the elevations of the floodplain, and it was found that there is in fact not floodplain. 100-year floodplain does not exist on the property. Effects on public health and safety. DEQ is responsible for reviewing well, septic, and stormwater plans for all major subdivisions. Butte-Silver Bow would not approve a subdivision final plat without DEQ approval guaranteeing safety of a development. The COSA, which is the application to DEQ, is currently in review. The subdivision is within the Butte-Silver Bow Police and Fire Districts, and the volunteer fire districts that would serve an emergency in this area are Home Atherton and Terra Verde, but the Butte-Silver Bow districts would respond as well. The road is to be brought up to county standards and named, and the naming conventions used are to make emergency response as efficient as possible. Effects on public health and safety. This whole slide is about nitrates. So in the early 2000s, subdividing lots this size would not have been realistic because of the nitrates, but since then, septic and well treatment technologies have developed which would make this development possible. There are level 2 septic systems, which are advanced treatment systems that result in a no increase in nitrate concentrations, and the subdivider is proposing that wells be treated and tested yearly. The well and septics proposed with this subdivision are less dense than the existing Warren Heights development. And if you can see on these two maps, the groundwater flow direction in this area is to the northwest, meaning that new septic system discharge would not impact existing neighboring wells. But this point is also slightly moot because the effluent from these advanced treatment systems is not greater than the existing nitrate levels. This slide is about water. The DEQ reviews for water quantity and dependability. So how much water, and then for how long can you rely on that amount of water to be available? They are aware of some issues in this area in the past, and they're reviewing the proposal very carefully. The DNRC also issues water rights that limit the amount of water that can be used per lot. The existing subdivisions in the area may not be restricted by water rights, whereas the new subdivision proposed here will be restricted to very little irrigation area. All of the new wells will be separated by at least 200 feet. The variance that I was talking about is for this trail on the west side of the property. All major subdivisions are required to dedicate parkland or cash in lieu, which must be used on a nearby park. So the Butte-Silver Bow Parks and Recreation Board did not want dedicated parkland, which would amount to about 0.83 acres required of this subdivision, and they also didn't want cash in lieu because there are no nearby parks which they would be able to use this cash in lieu money for. So on March 17th, the Parks and Rec Board approved the trail proposal instead because it satisfies a goal outlined in the Parks Plan, which was just finished in February, to create trail connectivity from town to Thompson Park. And this trail would only be along this section of subdivision, but could be a part of a future full connectivity trail. I'll also note that it's within property limits. It's on private property. It's not within the MDT right-of-way. Easements and access are another thing that the subdivision regulations require. There is a 60-foot wide road right-of-way easement for the interior road, and Northwestern has explained that they will be putting their utilities within that road easement. Easements are also provided on the rear and the side of lot lines per the subdivision regulations. And for major subdivisions, 2 access points are required. The interior road provides both access through Passmore Canyon Road to the south and Mountain View Drive to the north. And the Butte-Silver Roads Department did not see issue with this. The road will be improved, maintained by the HOA, and named. The Planning Board is responsible for making a recommendation to the Council of Commissioners to either approve, conditionally approve, or deny a subdivision application. The recommendation must be made within 10 days of the public hearing. The subdivision complies with the criteria outlined in the Montana Code Annotated and the Butte-Silver subdivision regulations, pending approval from the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat of the Blacktail Creek Major Subdivision, subject to the conditions specified in the staff report. And I will read the conditions. One, this preliminary plat shall be in effect for 3 years. At the end, the governing body, which is the Council of Commissioners, at the request of the subdivider, may extend the time frame. 2, the final plat shall conform to the requirements of the subdivision regulations and the requirements of the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. This includes certification by the treasurer that taxes are paid and current. 3, the applicants will be required to complete all public infrastructure improvements, including but not limited to road improvement, road signs, trail construction as applicable prior to applying for final plat approval, or enter into a subdivision improvement agreement. The agreement shall stipulate which type of security arrangements the subdividing entity elects to use and the time schedule proposed to accomplish the required improvements. Prior to applying for final plat approval, the applicants shall submit the required documentation for a review and secure written approval from the Butte-Silver Public Works Department for the following infrastructure. Compliance with all sections of Chapter 1204, construction within the public right-of-way for Butte-Silver Municipal Code, including design specifications of the new road. 5, all septic system, well, and stormwater installation shall obtain the required permits and approvals prior to submitting the final plat application. Addresses will be assigned to the new lots by the planning department at the time an individual lot owner applies for building permits. 7, the applicant shall be required to secure all applicable permits that may be necessary to make improvements in or near designated wetlands or surface water bodies, including but not limited to stormwater discharge from the DEQ stormwater program, a floodplain development permit, a 310 permit, and a 404 permit. 8, each future resident shall be required to install a residential fire sprinkler system at the time of construction and meet the requirements of A1013 Appendix A, fire standards of the subdivision regulations. 9, as required by the Butte-Silver subdivision regulations, Section 12L, a weed control plan shall be approved by the weed board prior to filing the final plat. 10, a variance title block must be provided on the face of the final plat pursuant to Section 18A5 of the Butte-Silver subdivision regulations. And that is all.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. All right, we will take questions of the planning board staff at this time, and then we'll ask the applicant to come up and provide any comments, and then we'll open the public hearing. So at this time, we'll take questions from staff. I have a couple questions. Ms. Osborne, you stated that the wells will be limited in their water usage. Who regulates that, if you know?
The Montana DNRC is who would regulate water rights, and I believe that the applicant has already acquired the letter from the DNRC limiting the entire subdivision to 10 acre-feet of water per year.
Okay, thank you. And then on your conditions, number 5 here, septic system, well, and stormwater will be approved by the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Is there opportunity to provide comment on that from local people in the area?
Mr. Chairman, is your question, can public comment be sent directly to the DEQ?
Specific to this application, yes.
Yes, we have been instructed to provide any public comment that we receive to the DEQ, and I believe that people are able to contact the DEQ themselves if they also wish to.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from staff or from the board? Ms. Jackshaw.
Lila, I have a question about the trail system versus the open park. It looks like in your report, the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks biologist was recommending an open space. Why did you guys go the other direction and do a trail versus an open space concept?
Thank you, Ms. Jackshaw. We had a subdivision review meeting with lots of different entities, both internal and external, and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks sent that comment in before the meeting, and in discussions at the meeting, we talked with the Parks and Rec Board director, who said that they don't prefer to take small pieces of land anymore because we have a lot of them that either aren't being used or aren't being maintained, and they instead would rather do something that was outlined in the new parks plan.
Mr. Daly. Mr. Daly, can you turn on your mic?
Can you hear now? Okay. My question is on the DEQ report, the CASA. What is the timeline for that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, I don't really know. You know, they take a lot of time in reviewing that, and I don't know how far they are in the process. And this is pretty typical of major subdivisions in this regard. You know, we're not reviewing the well, septic, and stormwater at a local level. The DEQ is doing that. So to condition the approval of the plat on that approval, it kind of puts the review requirement on the DEQ, and then we make sure that their standards are held by not approving the plat. I don't know what their time frame is, but the way that the conditions of approval are is that they would need to meet any DEQ requirements before you could even apply for final plat. So.
All right, well, I guess it seems like we got the cart before the horse, and we need to kind of have some of those answers before we can give a hard recommendation. Is this timing of this approval tonight normal?
This is very typical of subdivisions of this, because the DEQ approvals can take quite some time and energy. By conditioning it the way that it is written tonight, there would be no approval of the subdivision depending on if the DEQ denied the permit, or he would have to change. You know, there may take several iterations of his DEQ application to get approval, and state law actually states that requirement is only the DEQ approval is a requirement that's only need to be met before final plat, not preliminary plat. So this is how most municipalities do it, is condition it on that approval, so that we're looking at the local stuff, and the DEQ is reviewing the water well and the septic and the stormwater.
Yeah, because without any real data, there's a lot of complaints that I hear about septic leaching and other issues in that general area. So I guess I'd be very interested in seeing their report.
Yeah, it would need to meet, this application would need to meet DEQ standards to the letter of the law before, any final plat's approved, the way that these conditions are set up. So, we're not here to, evaluate the hydraulics in
Right.
that regard. That's DEQ. So, yeah, this is very typical of how everybody
Okay,
does it.
thank you.
Mr. Sally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. I saw there was a statement that the wells would be tested and treated yearly. And I guess the question I have is that something that the developer is going to handle? And is that kind of forever, or how long does that last? How does that work out?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sally, so that was proposed by the applicant. So you may ask the applicant the question when he comes up, but that was in his application to the DEQ. So the DEQ may make that a requirement upon their approval, but that was his proposal to the DEQ. We just took that right out of his COSA application.
So quick follow-up. So is that part of his application then? Is that'll be done?
That's part of his application to the DEQ
Okay.
for the subdivision, yeah. So they would be the ones reviewing if that's appropriate or
Okay.
not. You know, it may be more, maybe less, it may not be. You know, that's their review.
Thank you.
Mr. McLeod.
The question I have is on 8, the fire sprinkler system. That's a Butte-Silver, not a state requirement, correct?
Mr. McLeod, it's in our subdivision regulations, but that's from a change in a state law. That is a state requirement.
Okay, is that on all homes or just in certain areas?
It's on all homes outside of our immediate fire protection area. There's an option, you know, you can supply a tank or a pond, a fire pond of within 1,000 feet of all the residences. In the subdivision regulations, there's two options that you can go. You can either, you know, have local fire suppression system and hydrants in a tank or something within proximity to all the homes, or each home has to have a fire sprinkler system. So this was the option that was chosen by the applicant to meet the regs.
Okay, so can they ask for a variance to that, or
Can the homeowners ask for a variance to
The
that? or
developer.
The developer. I mean, I guess you can ask from a variance to anything, but, you know, we typically don't support variances that are against general health and safety.
okay? And just a quick point, I think that originally was designed for you're in Roosevelt Drive and timbered property. I mean, where they are on 1 acre and there's not a tree around them, you know, am I missing something there? Is it because of the distance?
It's the distance
Okay.
from the fire department, it's not a wildfire protection plan requirement or anything like that. It's because of the rural nature of the subdivision and the
distance.
response time from the fire department.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman. This piggybacking a little bit on Mr. McLeod on the water for this fire suppression comes from where? The well? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. O'Neill, that is correct. So before you can get a building permit, you'll have to prove that your well will meet the requirements for fire flows for the in-home suppression system.
Thank you, Chairman. Follow up with the DEQ reviewing a part of their review with the septic system, and is that based on the wells as well? Is it they're going to go in this area and make sure that all these houses can accommodate off the aquifer? Is that aquifer? Thank you, Mr. Clough.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. O'Neill, so without fully understanding all of the detail of the DEQ review, but they review for quantity and durability. So they make sure, dependability, durability, same thing. So they make sure that there's a volume and a sustainable volume, and they do that by a lot of different methods, from well logs around. They may ask the applicant to go out and drill a well and pump test it. There's a lot of different scenarios depending on what the surrounding data from the existing well shows. I'm unaware of how far they are in that process, but they're held to the standard to prove quantity and dependability.
Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a question on the water limit on the wells. Who's going to be in charge of limiting how much water somebody takes out of each well, and how are they going to control that?
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Riley, so that is it's a water right question. So in the state of Montana, you get exempt wells if you have 35 gallons per minute and under 10 acre feet, and that's the goal here. But anything other than that requires a water right, and the DNRC is who regulates water rights.
But nobody's going to be testing each of these 11 wells every day to see how much water they're taking out of them. So, and then if these other wells aren't producing enough, who's going to be in charge of that?
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Riley, so it would be handled the same as any other water right issue in the state is handled. You know, my guess is they're from a complaint basis, but basically, you know, I'm sure you understand water right laws and courts are difficult, but they wouldn't be monitored any more strict than any other water right. I do believe that his proposal is limit the area of irrigation. Irrigation is the #1 water user. You know, we're talking about these fire suppression systems and stuff like that. That's for emergency. The amount of water you use daily for, you know, your normal household use is minimal compared to irrigation, and they would limit the acreage of irrigation, and that captures the majority of the water use. Yeah, but it would not be Butte-Silver Bow if that's what you're asking. We are not going to monitor the water usage.
Mr. Daly.
Just for perspective, if you took the 10 acre feet per year and divided it by 11 houses, how many gallons per minute would each well be? I can think in gallons per minute. I can't think in acre feet.
Apologize for my math. I think an acre foot is 360,000 gallons. So 10 acre feet is 3 million gallons divided by 11 is you're back down to the 340,000 gallons or something like that. I apologize if my math is wrong. I didn't use a calculator. That's all I had. But
340 gallons per day?
340 per year, 340,000 gallons per year. And so we need to understand here that the 35 gallons per minute, 10 acre feet requirement is a state requirement for the state legislature exempted wells from needing a water right if they are underneath that requirement. So everybody gets a well, you know, you have the water rights, that amount of water, that's just a state thing.
Okay.
Question for staff, just given the discussion on wells. Is it fair to say that if the DEQ finds in the aquifer to be inadequate, that the subdivision is not going to be approved?
Mr. Chairman, I hate to speak for the DEQ. You know, I think that there's a really good possibility that there's going to be, you know, several iterations of this thing and proposals. It's one of those things that if it meets the criteria in state law, it meets, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. So it's usually a pretty black and white thing. But the DEQ does have the ability to deny it, yes, if that's what you're asking. And then your condition of approval would need that approval, so their denial would then deny the subdivision.
So just to clarify, if the DEQ denies the wells, the subdivision is also denied.
The subdivision would not meet its conditions of approval, I guess would be the best way to say that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board? All right, at this time, we'd like to ask the applicant to come forward and make any comments on behalf of this agenda item. Please state your name and for the record.
Hi, I'm Gary Fox. Good to see everybody. Thank you for having me. Thanks for being here on this Thursday afternoon. My wife and I own the property. I'm a civil engineer. she's actually a structural engineer. We have 2 young girls, 2 and 5. Part of the reason that this came up is because I'm a civil engineer, so I had a background on septic systems and subdivisions a little bit. I understand this property has some issues, but I felt like I was in a good position to, help address those issues with some of my background and knowledge, and I felt like we could do it in a sensitive and, good way. So that's kind of the background. I work for a company called WGM Group, so I've designed a lot of septic systems and worked on some subdivisions. My wife is a structural engineer. Like I said, she's working on some of the buildings in Uptown right now. We've got a good team working on this project. We've consulted with a lot of people, SepticNet and the wet guys. So SepticNet has the technology for the drain fields. It's a level 2 treatment system. It's kind of the most advanced treatment system for residential systems, and it treats the effluent to 7.5 milligrams per liter, which is, I think it's the only system in the state that does that. There's 1 or 2, I think, in Warren Heights currently. So that would be the system for every new lot. We're working with O'Keefe Drilling, Scott from S&H on a weed control plan, Bob from the Parks Department, G&E Surveying and Engineering. Water Locators is a group that went out there and did an electroseismic study to check the groundwater. And then the Bureau of Mines and Geology is also consulting with us on this project. And then I've talked to a few of the neighbors, and I feel like we've had some positive interactions with some of the neighbors. I haven't met everybody. I sent out a letter a couple months ago to just the immediate neighbors. I've tried to be upfront about the proposal. I understand it's uncomfortable. For something like this, I understand that this property's been like this for a long time. The plat, Warren Heights plat, is dated 1973, which is 50 years ago. And this property is shown on it, and I think it's been pretty close to what it is for 50 years. And so yeah, it is uncomfortable. We took this on partially because there's a road through it. There's the highway is by it, and it'd be fairly simple to, at least from a perspective, to create some new lots. That was part of the intrigue for us. We've got a loan out on the land. We both have day jobs, and so we're trying to move something forward. We thought this development would be low impact to the community. It's a great community. It's an awesome place down there. It's very quiet. It's peaceful. These neighbors have lived there for a long time, and I think love it. I think they'll tell you about that. We're proposing residential, single-family residential. It's unzoned. Theoretically, it could be something different. The Warren Heights plat says commercial, although that's probably not worth a whole lot. But we're low-density residential. We're not townhomes or apartments. We're not storage units or commercial. So it seemed like a good use of land. There's not a lot of empty lots down there for sale, although it's a desirable place to live, right? So that was part of the intrigue too, was that our goal has always been to subdivide and sell some properties individually to families or people that want to live there, because we think that there are, and we feel like I'm in a good position to do that. I feel like with some of my background and understanding on the water and sewer, that I could do this in a sensitive way. So I'm sorry I'm going here and there. Thank you to the planning staff for their work. We had a pre-application meeting probably 12 months ago or quite a while ago, so we've been working on this for a while. There was a FEMA floodplain, like Lila said, that was approximate, so that was removed. I mentioned we're working with the Bureau of Mines and Geology, so they did a couple studies in this area years ago because there are high nitrates and some water issues. That was known, and so I've talked to the authors of these reports, and actually just got done talking to them, and we're working with them and DEQ to address the water and sewer. The sewer, we think is addressed with the septic net, the advanced treatment. Background nitrates, the nitrate concentration of the groundwater in that area averages 6.5 per the report. I mean, it varies. But so the septic net systems, the new drain fields, treat groundwater to 7.5 or less, and their data actually says it treats it to less than 5 milligrams per liter, which is less than the concentration of the groundwater. So that's one of the reasons why I think, from a sewer standpoint, this can fly. I think that can be addressed. From a water standpoint, that's in the reports also. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about water pressures and availability. I've heard a couple of the stories about, there was a well drilled out there that can't find water. In my research and looking at it, I think it's isolated, and I don't think it's a widespread issue, but we'll hear more about that, I'm sure. So I talked to the Bureau of Mines and Geology. They have one monitor well in this aquifer that is to the southeast of the project site. It's in this bedrock aquifer. It's a fractured bedrock aquifer. Most of the wells, if not all of them, are in it, and they have monitored this water over the past 20 years, and it's all online. You can find this, but it's fairly steady. It has not declined. The groundwater in general is not going down. It's fairly steady, which infers, that even with some of the recent subdivisions over the last 20 years, that there still is water, and there's no indication that this fractured bedrock aquifer cannot support a few more wells. There's 50 plus wells existing in Warren Heights, and we are proposing to add a couple, but again, we're working with DEQ in the state. That's going to be a long process. It's going to be an uphill battle. We recently submitted the application to DEQ for them to review water, sewer, and stormwater, and they have not submitted their full comments, but they have noted that they're going to be strict and stringent, and it's going to be a process. Their hydrogeologist will review this, and they're not going to take on liability for us to affect the neighbors with this development. Excuse me. I just want to respond, I'm about done, sorry, to a couple of the questions. The fire protection, the sprinklers would come from the well, but most likely to meet that, the house would need a supplemental tank. So all the houses would have a tank to supplement pressure for the sprinklers, just because the water out there, the wells they're not running at 100 gallons per minute or 30, they're running at 10 to 20, excuse me. So that'll go through when they do the land use permit or design the building. As far as water limitations or monitoring water, to me that's done a couple ways. So there's a limit on the number of bedrooms, which DNRC correlates to the amount of water. I think the number of bedrooms will be limited during the land use permit process when the homeowner comes and brings house plans to the county. They'll review the number of bedrooms, make sure there's not too many. And then the other thing, like Dylan mentioned, is the irrigation. The irrigable acreage is small on these, partially to conserve water. So they won't be able to irrigate much. And the question obviously is, well, who's going to check that? The HOA, is going to check that, but I know that may not mean a lot to you guys. I think that will be easily policed by the neighbors also, and DNRC will respond and enforce that if somebody is irrigating too much. It's my understanding that Warren Heights doesn't have a restriction on how much they can irrigate right now. But these will be more xeriscape type lots. There is an option, I told myself I wouldn't say this. There's an option to meter the houses, to meter water use. I'm not proposing that, and I will work with DEQ. They may require that, but we're not proposing that. We don't think that's necessary. We don't think the water volume or the max flow of 35 gallons per minute to DNRC will be exceeded. Again, the DEQ process we submitted recently, they're reviewing. There's a meeting coming up with the engineers, and there will be multiple rounds of comments and responses. So that process will take a couple more months probably. So just to finish up, when we look at this property from perspective, there's a road through it, there's access, there's existing homes there. It's kind of a fill-in to me. It's kind of in between a subdivision and a highway, so I kind of consider that a fill-in. We're not developing on the fringe. We're not expanding the service area. I think these lots will maintain the character and the safety of the neighborhood. I think the planning staff has agreed with the project so far, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys listening in. Again, I apologize. I know any development in your backyard, especially something that has been like this for so long, is uncomfortable, but I think it will be limited. The road will be improved, but won't be a major construction to the road. It just improved. That's the only road construction. Then there'll be houses, and presumably those would come, spotty down the line. It's not all going to be one big. At least that's our plan, is to sell the lots individually. We don't have any plans to build on all the lots. We don't have that sort of capital. We just thought this would be a good place for some more housing and a couple more people who would like to enjoy the neighborhood. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate all you guys. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the board before we open the public hearing? All right,
I
great.
have a question.
Oh, Mr. Daly.
And this is probably a combination between the applicant and staff with the new legislation coming, and how are you going to limit the number of bedrooms? Or how would that be managed if going future, I mean, the plan is for single family houses, but the new legislation busts that wide open.
Mr. Pipnich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, so that new legislation was for zoning, and this area is unzoned. So anything that, any requirement for single-family homes or whatever would be an HOA covenant, but really what restricts that is the septic permits. So when they apply for a septic permit to get these septic net systems, you have to list the number of bedrooms to get your septic permit. So our health department would review that anytime that there's building permit that they're in accordance with their approved septic permit.
Right, okay, thank you for the clarification.
Mr. McLeod.
I just had a quick, it may be out of order, but I'm just thinking before we start with everyone, it might be appropriate for Mr. Pippin, it's just to give a quick little overview of what we're doing tonight and what the process is. Like if things, there's a process beyond the night, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that might benefit some folks to know.
Mr. Pipnich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McLeod, yes, thank you for that opportunity. So the subdivision process, big picture in general is quite long. This is a major subdivision. You apply for a major subdivision for preliminary plat. To get a preliminary plat approval, there are 2 public hearings, one at the planning board, which we're doing tonight, one at the council commissioners level. The planning board makes a recommendation to the commissioners to either approve, conditionally approve, or deny. And then regardless, the council commissioners have their own public hearing, take public comment, and then make their decision on the preliminary plat. Typically, those are, if approved, are approved with conditions like we've outlined in the staff report here. And you have to meet all of those conditions before you apply for your final plat. And then we ensure that all those conditions are met before granting final plat, and which is another approval by the Council of Commissioners at a later date. So the preliminary plat is kind of like, if you meet all these, it might be okay kind of thing. And then you come back at final plat and say, okay, we met all those conditions, and then it, you know, then you would get approved. So conditional approval of preliminary plat means, you know, is basically the Council Commissioners of this planning board saying that, you know, you got to do your homework on these things, and if you meet those, then you have your preliminary approval to keep on with the subdivision.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted folks to know that, you know, we make a recommendation to the council, and it isn't, tonight doesn't decide anything other than that recommendation we'll make. Is that fair?
I'm sorry, Mr. McLeod, could you repeat your question?
I was just saying that tonight, I want folks to know whatever decision we make is just a recommendation to the council. It doesn't mean anything gets finalized tonight, other than that recommendation.
Mr. Pipnich?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is correct, and the Council Commissioners will also hold their own public hearing, which has been advertised. I believe it's advertised as next week if this board makes a decision tonight.
All right, great. Thank you, sir. All right, this time we'll open the public hearing. So we'll let the record show that we received letters from the public. Mr. Brad Belkey, Glenn and Sylvia Cunningham, and Mr. Sam Redfern. So those letters have been provided to the board. So we'll open the public comment at this time. We'll make 3 calls for proponents, those in favor of the application, 3 calls for opponents, those opposing the application, and then we'll ask the applicant to come up and address anything else. So at this time, we'll call for any proponents to this condition to approve this subdivision. First call for proponents. Second call for proponents. Third call for proponents. Proponents. So at this time, we'll take comments for opponents, those opposed to the subdivision. Okay, I'll repeat that, sorry. So the public hearing is open now, so we'll take 3 calls for proponents, those in favor of the subdivision, and then we'll take 3 calls for opponents, those opposed to the subdivision. So this call is for proponents, those in favor of the subdivision. So first call for proponents. All right. Second call for proponents. Third call for proponents. Okay. We'll now make a call for opponents, those against the subdivision. Come on up and speak, yep. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Julie Reichley, and I'm here on behalf of my husband and
Ms. Reichley, for everyone in the audience, in accordance with the Council of Commission's procedures, we'll limit public comments to 3 minutes each.
Okay.
Okay, I'll give you a wave at 30 seconds.
Okay. My name is Julie Reichley. I'm here on behalf of my husband and myself, Howard Reichley. We are very opposed to this subdivision. A couple reasons why are additional housing would seriously impede and drastically reduce the aquifer for domestic use in the area. There is not adequate groundwater supply to sustain the existing residences. Therefore, additional residences would severely deplete the groundwater supply, and dry wells are a very big concern for us. If we added an addition of 11 more homes, it would tax our existing water table. As it is, our well capacities are very poor, And we're fearful that there will be more problems arising if houses draw on this existing aquifer, which has been said is a fractured aquifer. And I'm speaking on behalf of my neighbor a little bit as well, that lives directly across the street from me. I have fairly adequate water. My neighbor, whose wellhead is less than 200 feet from mine, or whatever the specifications is, has very poor water. So that test well site that is southeast of this proposed property probably is not as telling as it could be. Some of the other concerns that we have is that this is in a wetland area. And Blacktail Creek could be polluted, and it's part of a wetland. And this would negatively impact all of the habitats and species of concern, which the species of concern which are listed through biological studies are bald eagles, blue herons, aspen trees, which all inhabit the area. And then there would also be risks to our public health. And Blacktail Creek is what's considered a water impaired stream, and it directly dumps into the Clark Fork River, which is protected as a federal Superfund site. And so the headwaters of that are right there on Blacktail Creek. So that is a very large concern as well. Also, some of the other more minor concerns are there would be additional traffic, creating dust. The roads are poorly
30
developed.
seconds, Ms. Reichley.
The roads are poorly developed, and heavily used roads would cause nuisance and hazards to our health. And also, there's some concern about the rural firefighting and, you know, what that would consist of. So, but just for the record, I do oppose this, and I do have a letter. I don't know who I should go to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reichley. Further comment? Come on up, sir.
My name is John Kriskovich. I live at 115 Larkspur Lane here in Butte. And Mr. Fox just noted that there hadn't been any, development or anything such as that in the past 50 years. Don Renz and Irene Humber tried to do a development here starting in 1998, and it went through 2000 through all the not court system, but the DEQ and the planning board and things such as this. And the reason it's not there is because it got turned down. So there's a 32-page document here if anybody would like to see it as to why it was not accepted. And then nitrates. This is a big deal, and it still is. I'd like to see a study done in our entire neighborhood as far as what the nitrates are right now. When I moved out there in 1993, we didn't have anything done. And I know my well is 254 feet, used to have 240 feet of static. And the only time that nitrates were ever checked out there is when Don Renz wanted to do this subdivision out there, okay? And so the results of that were in, let me see. August 18. Okay. In 2000, my nitrate levels were 8.9 milligrams per liter. In 2006, that jumped up to, I believe it was 9.6. And as of, let's see, 2018, they're now at 15.7, which is 5 milligrams per liter over the Montana Clean Water Act. And supposedly, when you're involved with the Montana Clean Water Act, that sends up immediate red flags on this whole thing. So in my opinion, we need to do a test on every well out there. Nothing has been done out here. And the only reason this
You're at 30
was-
seconds, sir.
Okay. The only reason this was done is because the property next to me, which is owned by Larry Leathers here, the people had to do a test on it, the Bloms did, in order to sell the property, and I don't know why, but they had to. So when the results of that came back, Ryan McCarthy's well, Joe's, I don't know about Joe's, but my well was high. So that's why they had to do that. And that's the last time it's been done. So I would think before this subdivision is even okayed, we need to know what our nitrates are now. Not waiting for anything else. This is so important. It's already violating the Montana Clean Water Act. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional opponents?
Yeah, my name is Ray Becky. I'm a retired real estate agent, I guess you could say. I was in the business for about 30 years and just handled subdivisions and raw land. And all the issues I've heard tonight on the water were ones I don't have to recite them that were, but that was one concern of mine out there. My family sister owns lot number 3 of Warren Heights, which is adjoining this property. And but the water is a big concern out there as far as it drops. I know it runs clear down the East Ridge. It'll change from east of the interstate to west of the interstate. And a real wet year, people usually will have a pretty good well. But if they do dry up, if you get a dry year, they drop. And so that's one of the things out here too, that was brought up. And then as far as the nitrates, that's a very serious thing with subdivision. And I think the property in itself and a few things that was by the owner mentioned that the properties will be used, each tract will only be for a 1 resident, and it'll be, call it a single family. It's 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, whatever. And I believe the state, they have a regulation of how much water, if you got a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom or bathroom, 2-bathroom, 3-bathroom, how much you have to have. And that should be there if the adjoining property owners, or if this gets approved. He mentioned that there wouldn't be any commercial use of the tracks, and I think that's a very positive thing. There shouldn't be there with all the infrastructure that's there and the investment that the adjoining property owners and those that are around there have. I believe there should be some kind of a height restriction. I know what I mean by that is local people around that have been here for a while and live, and they can see other people that may come in and thinks, you know, I've got an acre and a half, so I'm going to build a 40-foot high barn and block the view of the other neighbors and things like that. So as far as, you know, then there is a lot of that going. Probably know with the investment out there and what he's talking about and what the cost is going to be, I would know trailers. And as he brought up, no storage used, no junk autos, things like this. And I think all those things should be not only in the HOA, but probably other things that I've dealt with an awful lot has been deed restrictions, is where they're put into the deed restrictions. And also the, trying to think what here.
Sir, you have 30 seconds.
Covenants, okay. All right, so that's sharing all the concerns plus added mine.
Thank you. Additional opponents?
Hi, my name is Joe McCarthy. I live at 110 Larkspur Lane. My son Ryan has the house just north of us at 108 Larkspur Lane. Everybody, I'm sure everyone in this room is concerned about the water, and we're trying to get that across, and I know you're recognizing that. But just as a point, my son when he built, he bought the acre of land next to me, and we drilled a well in March prior to him starting on his house because I wanted to make sure he had water. Drilled the well in March, went to tie it in October, and there was no water left. Drilled another well. In total, we've drilled 4 wells on his property, the last one being over 500 feet deep. Now, I know other people don't have problems, and a lot of people have a lot of problems, but I just, not only for our sake, but for the people that are going to be buying, if this happens to pass, buying these lots, you know, there is no guarantee you're going to have water. And if the water you get, there's no guarantee you're going to keep it. So that should be something that's stressed with these future homeowners. Also, can I ask Mr. Fox a question?
No, not at this time. This is public comment.
Oh, okay. Is there a time I can ask him a question?
Not in this forum, no.
Oh, okay. All right, well, that's just what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional opponents?
My name is Judy Keto, and I live out on Meadowview. I've been out there for 34 years. And it is absolutely pristine. We drilled a well at 253 Meadowview that many years ago. And my well is 400 feet deep. And we don't get a heck of a lot of anything good at 400 feet. But my concern is for the people that might come to buy these properties. Are they going to be aware of what a well is going to cost them today? I think it's probably $70 to $80 a foot. Mine was over $10,000, and that was 34 years ago. So my concern would be for those people, if they're not prepared to hear what the water rights are, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's like on a first come, first served basis. So if my well is starting to go down, all the people that are after me by, logging your well, all of those people have to shut theirs down in order for me to have my water because I've got the water rights on my property. So I think it's only fair for those people to know what's going to happen if they lose their water. They've lost their water because people like myself that have been out there for many years, it's our water right. So I would feel really sad for those people if they built a new home out there and they had no water. I would really have concern for that. So I guess that's all I have for you. And I just really want to stress to you how pristine it is. And like the lady said, it is the headwaters of the Clark River, right behind my home. There's an acre behind my acre. And it is pristine. So that's all I have to say, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Johnson, and I reside at 250 Meadowview Drive. So I'm in the Warren Heights division. A lot of what I've heard so far tonight, I heard a lot of I believe or I don't know. That tells me that not all the questions have been answered. Ultimately, I know you're awaiting more decisions to be made by the DEQ on whether to proceed with the subdivision or not. So I hope we get the appropriate answers that we need for the area. Obviously, what you've heard from the people in the audience, there is concern with the aquifer in our area. And speaking for my house, I've resided out there for just over 20 years now. My house was built in '97. I moved in there in 2002, but the original well went dry. It was replaced before I moved in there. So currently, I'm on well number 2, which was in there before I moved into my current house. So the aquifer and the well issue is definitely a big concern for all of us out there. And speaking just in the surrounding properties, Julie lives right across from me, but my brother at one time was kitty corner from me. That house was later sold. They had poor water quality. They had to go ahead and put in another well, but drilling that new well 500, 600 feet, it didn't achieve them anything. They can't even water their lawn, which brings me to my next point with the referring to the Warren Heights as being a really dense development. Well, what you did here, you eliminated 30% of the homes you could put in the acreage. But what you've created now, someone moves into that 1.67 acre lot, I want to irrigate the whole thing. So I'm going to be using even more water. And again, for these regulations, the control, no one meters our water out there. We don't draft shares. Everybody waters, you can water sun up to sundown if you wanted to. There's no regulations out there. And likewise with the housing, that's my other concern. You know, you get 1, 2, it'd be real easy to build 2 houses in there, or, you know, big mansions. Well, I hope the bedroom thing holds true and that you limit the size of the developments on that. But yeah, definitely a lot of the concerns I hear, you know, I'm echoing as well. I believe, and I don't know, we need to get the answers. That's all I would hope we would get. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Additional opponents?
My name is Thomas Waring. I live at 251 Meadowview Drive, and that's right next door to Judy. My well's only 85 feet. It's gone dry a couple times, but I'm the bad neighbor who doesn't water when my well goes dry. So, you know, I never drilled a deeper one. I just let the grass go brown. But, you know, the wells there go up and down. My well probably, right now, probably the standing water is about 40 feet. But maybe in September or August, I'll be down 85 to the bottom of my well. So the water levels fluctuate. The report that was mentioned before that the Bureau of Mines and Geology did in 2004 indicates that the groundwater is basically new. It's new water. So it's being recharged every year from the surface. Now, some of it might be in closed pockets, but probably most of it is in fractured bedrock. The very first sentence of the summary in this report, and I'll just read the essence of it. Warren Heights, 4 miles south of Butte, the bedrock, I'm sorry. The septic waste systems are located on fractured granite bedrock. Fractured granite. So that water that's recharging from the surface can basically go any direction near the surface. The general movement might be to the, northwest in direction, probably that's the ground slopes that direction. But locally, on 1 acre, you don't know where that water's going from the septic. It could be going east until it hits some groundwater that's going northwest. Nobody knows that. And that's why I think that probably some of the neighbors immediately adjacent here are concerned. And I know you're not ruling on that, and DEQ will. But I suspect that we objected on the subdivisions that Ulan's put in behind us several years back, and the DEQ listened. So I would suggest to the neighbors here that you do write
Sir, you have
the
30
DEQ.
seconds. 30 seconds.
3 seconds. Write to DEQ because they will listen if you have concern about the water. Doesn't matter what happens here, you know, in terms of it going to the council or whatever, it's the DEQ who will make that decision. So if you want your voice heard on terms of what happens, the DEQ is going to make the decision in terms of the number of lots and so forth. Just as a final comment, we could avoid all these hassles if we had water and sewer out there. And that's the county commissioner's issue. But that, folks, would solve these problems. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, additional opponents.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Patrick Kiefler. I live at 90 Meadowview Drive. I'm kind of the first house you hit as you drive into the Warren Heights subdivision, and as all my neighbors will tell you, I have a very dead lawn. I don't water it very well. My well is sitting at about 320 feet. I get 10 gallons per minute. If I'm taking a shower, I can tell when someone turns on a faucet to brush their teeth. I moved out there when my children were 2 and 6 months old. We unpacked the bed, we unpacked the crib, and we plugged a water cooler in because I told my kids and my wife, do not touch the water, do not drink it. Here's some water from that water cooler. It's still plugged in 12 years later. I have all the concerns my neighbors do, the water, the nitrates, the traffic. I live right next to this dirt road. I don't know what the county, what their plans are for, you know, maintaining that road, but when the kids are driving their motorbikes and side by side and up and down that road, if I don't have my windows closed, I'm vacuuming dust off my counters and tabletops. And anyone that drives into Warren Heights subdivision right now down Meadowview Drive knows that road is one big pothole. Adding 11 to 22 more cars plus delivery trucks is going to just compound the problem. So I don't want to say we're beating a dead horse with, you know, comments about water and nitrates, but we don't want to have a dead horse out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional opponents? All right, this is the second call for opponents. Third call for opponents. All right. At this time, give the applicant the opportunity to come up and address any comments if you wish. We won't limit you, but please be succinct.
Thank you. I agree. They're valid comments. I think clarity was the big one that radiated with me. You need clarity and more information. And that information's coming. DEQ can supply that, and there's more work that's being done to address water and sewer. There'll be a new groundwater study, most likely, and DEQ has that information. Lila has some of that too. Yeah, I agree. I would want some certainty too. In my discussions with the Bureau of Mines and Geology, who wrote those reports, and I think we can provide that clarity. I think we can provide that protection. I think there is water in the aquifer. It is a fractured bedrock aquifer. But yeah, it's sensitive. As far as the surface water that came up, the streams, that's a good point. DEQ regulates surface water contamination, so any septic systems that connect with Blacktail Creek or Little Blacktail Creek right there, that's something that they look into. Though the old reports did some sampling of surface water in those streams, and we're going through that right now. The samples that they took a while ago did not find high nitrates close to the subdivision. They found some high nitrates in surface water down a little bit lower. That's something that they're going to look at in detail. We have taken some recent samples from some wells, just a couple, 3 to be exact, next to this property, and tested those for nitrates. The tests on those were 6.5 milligrams per, this is rough, 6.5 milligrams per liter, 6.5 milligrams per liter, and 9 milligrams per liter. Each of those compared to the test results in the report was pretty consistent, actually. So in my mind, that showed that there has been some consistency throughout the years, and nitrates are not going up. The reports do pin high nitrates to septic systems. Yeah, but the data I've seen, they're not increasing. The height restrictions, views were something that came up at the very beginning. They got great views of the mountains out there, and that's a valid point. We do have covenants and restrictions that will be put in place. No junk vehicles, no campers, all that stuff is in there. I don't know, I don't remember the height restriction is in there at this point, but those haven't been finalized, and we can put that in. I don't want to limit them to a single story. John brought that up with me before. The lots are a little bit offset from his houses, from that first row of houses, and it slopes down. So I don't think a two-story house is going to affect your views, especially with an offset, but there should be height restriction for something really tall in the covenants, which can be put in. The expense was brought up too. I think that's a good point. These are going to be expensive systems. The septic net systems are really expensive. The deep wells are really expensive. The fire sprinklers are an expense. Like that's, I understand that, and to me, I've grappled with that for a long time. At this point, I don't think that that's quite reason to not do this. The expenses, I think it can still work. That's about all I have. I feel like I would be a good person to do this, a good champion. I feel like I could help educate, and I don't know. This fell to us. We own this ourselves. We don't have investors. There's a chance, when this was listed, it was listed as a development opportunity. There's a chance this could have been bought by somebody a little more savvy, maybe with a little backing, a little funding. It wasn't. It fell to us. Yeah, I think we're going to work with DEQ and be sensitive. I think we're going to provide you with the information you need, and we obviously need to. So that's it. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we'll close the public portion of the meeting, and we'll open it back up for board discussion. As a reminder, we're looking to recommend to the Council of Commissioners either approve, deny, or conditionally approve this subdivision. So with that, is there any board discussion? Mr. Daly.
From a process, can we delay our decision until after the DEQ report is, until we have a chance? I think we should be able to see that data and see that information.
Mr. Pivinich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, yeah, you absolutely can do that. The reason that it's in front of you tonight before that happens is because Butte-Silver relies on the DEQ for that information, meaning planning staff is not hydrologists. You know, the members of the public are not hydrologists. They've raised a lot of concerns. The planning board isn't, so we intend to put that science and engineering review on the DEQ. That's their process in this, and that's how they help out the communities. So basically, by approving, or whatever decision you make tonight, if it is to approve with that condition, then your approval wouldn't go into effect until they approve it. But you can, as a board, you can make any, you can choose to hold. I believe you have to make a decision within 10 days of the public hearing.
Okay, how do we be sensitive? We heard a lot about septic and water concerns were the primary concerns. How do we be sensitive to that? And I mean, like, I'm all for more lots and more development in Butte, but I also want to be sensitive to the facts that are ahead of us. And even though there some of them are circumstantial or empirical data, the public has made some good comments or good points tonight. I don't know. I feel mixed up in my process, and
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, I mean, I guess I can't answer that for you. As far as that goes, you know, as a board, you need to decide. The question in front of you is, with the conditions listed on the staff report, do you believe that it would meet the subdivision regulations for impacts related to the subdivision as outlined in the staff report? So if there are questions outstanding, do you believe the conditions outlined in the report would adequately protect the neighbors from those concerns? If not, you can add conditions, or you can choose to, you know, one of the three options in front of you, I guess. So,
Okay.
does that help you a little
It helps
bit?
quite a bit, yeah. Okay, so if there's gonna be, water restrictions and it's gonna be governed by the HOA, I don't know, I've lived in several HOAs and they are, well, they're not very powerful in terms of regulating anything. So I don't see the HOA as being an answer to regulating the water usage. Is there a way that we can add meters? You know, that adds cost to the end user. Is that happen here, or is that DEQ question?
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Daly, so, you know, like I said, Butte-Silver Boat doesn't employ a hydrologist. Those types of conditions would probably be on the DEQ approval. And typically in these situations, the DNRC would be the regulatory entity of water rights. So if they go over their allowed water usage, you know, there could be a complaint made. Those water right decisions are civil decisions between water users and not necessarily local government control. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McLeod.
Mr. Daly, I don't know if this will help or not, but if before tonight's meeting, before this came before us, if you asked me from selling real estate in Butte, if there was one area in Butte you'd be concerned about wells, I'd tell you Warren Heights. Okay, that's a fact. There's more. I know of 2, 3 personally that they went dry, and these folks have said all kinds of things. That being said, I think if there's one condition on here that we ever impose or add, DEQ is, in my experience, by far I mean, I can't speak for DEQ, but I can tell you that to get that engineered through DEQ, if it's not adequate, they're not going to approve it, in my experience. Okay, so I think the role of us is to say, hey, whether we, you know, agree with the conditions, or as Mr. Pipinich said, you can add conditions, but it's more of an advisory thing, because really where the rubber's going to meet the road is to get it to the council, one way or the other, and have these folks engage with DEQ. And then the council, and I think the council can, if there's meters and things like that, they could do. Not to say you can't ask for that, but I don't think it's right for us to hold them up when that process is going to take place regardless. And I think their DEQ is going to be the one to really dive into it, for lack of a better term.
Mr. Sally.
Mr. Pipinich, can you walk the board through also, we're at preliminary plat, do you want to just maybe speak to the next step? If preliminary plat was approved, final plat, and how that would go forward, and approvals there, please?
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Sally, absolutely. So, you know, kind of as I stated before, preliminary plat, what's in the public hearing tonight was the first of 2 public hearings. You know, the planning board then makes a recommendation to the council of commissioners, where they have another public hearing, and then the final decision for preliminary plat will be with them. Again, at any point in time, allowing to change conditions, or, you know, conditionally approve or deny. And then those conditions must be met prior to filing for final plat, and then the final plat review is to check to make sure that you've met those conditions. So, and as kind of the Chairman Steitzer asked prior to this question, you know, there is the condition number 5, that all septic systems, well and stormwater installation shall obtain the required permits and approvals prior to submitting the final plat application. So they would need that DEQ approval in hand before they could even apply for the final plat before that, you know, this would be subdivided. So, does that help?
Further discussion from the board? All right. So, if there's no further discussion, I think I'll put forward a motion to approve the Black Creek major subdivision given the following conditions in the staff report. Does anyone second that motion? Second by Mr. Sally. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Mr. Riley, Ms. Jackshaw, Mr. Daly. So the ayes have it by 4. Nays have it by 3. All right. Yeah, I vote, so 4-3 approve. Okay, so the motion passes to recommend approval to the Council of Commissioners. Okay, so again, to reiterate, this is one public meeting. The next public meeting will be at the Council of Commissioners next week. You can express your thoughts or comments at that public meeting as well, and additionally to the DEQ. Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, that meeting is next Wednesday at 7:30 in this room.
Okay. All right. That is all on tonight's agenda. Is there any other business? All right. We are adjourned.